Welcome to Sigest, your fortnightly serving of digestible science from plant and food research.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Brogan McGraw and you're listening to It's a Science Life for Me, a careers podcast series talking to researchers at Plant and Food Research about their science journey so far. Today, I'm talking to Jayaraman, a postdoctoral research scientist and the host microbe interactions team. So welcome to the show, Jay. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
That's awesome. So first off, do you want to tell us about your role here at Plant and Food Research and what is a postdoctoral scientist?
Yeah, sure. So a postdoctoral scientist is someone that has completed their PhD looking at a very specific part of their project. Mine in particular was looking at a kiwifruit pathogen called PSA. It's a bacterial pathogen that caused significant damage to the industry. So luckily, not every postdoctoral scientist, but some get to carry on their PhD work into working as a proper scientist for an institution, either university or a Crown Research Institute, such as Plant and Food. And I got to stick with my project with PSA, and I'm looking at some aspects regarding that.
Oh, awesome. So sorry, PSA is a pathogen of...
Kiwifruit,
Kiwifruit, okay,
so
awesome.
It's a bacterial pathogen that infects kiwifruit plants and particularly the gold kiwifruit variety. It not only infects the plant, it can actually kill the plant itself, and that has happened since 2011.
So where did your interest in science start? So was it at school, at high school, at university, or...
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm actually a bit of a nerd, so I've been interested in science since I was a little kid. I always knew that I'd be in science, just I didn't know in what capacity. So I kind of just followed the track of a typical school kid and did my undergrad in biotechnology and then jumped onto plant science when I came to New Zealand. And I felt the bug and I've been with it ever since.
Awesome. So you didn't initially start in plant science. You started sort of in biotechnology, but not plant biotechnology?
No. It was actually mammalian biotechnology. So I primarily looked at tissue engineering and also food applications, such as brewery work and things like that. I never actually studied plant biology at all until I came to New Zealand for my postgrad work. I never even considered doing plant biology at that point.
Wow, and so you did your undergrad in Australia,
yes.
In biotechnology, and then you came to New Zealand,
yes.
And then you did your postgrad?
Yes, I did a postgraduate diploma at Auckland University.
Yeah.
And through that, I learned more about plant biology. I used that to get a job at Massey University in Palmerston North. And one thing led to another. I started a PhD with a Korean researcher who had moved to New Zealand. And that was when the kiwifruit industry was really feeling the brunt of the PSA infection. And kiwifruit orchards were suffering around New Zealand. And so the government and the whole industry actually picked up their game, and they put a lot of money into researching this pathogen and try and find a way to solve the problem, a way to fix it. And my PhD project came out of it. So I got to work on PSA.
Okay. And so the whole plant science thing, so coming from a really non-science plant science background, what about plant science interested you?
So I never considered plant science because in general, there's a lot of focus on medical sciences. There's a lot of research that goes into it. When we think science, we think of medicine. And that's unfortunate because plant science, and this is something I realized late in my career, really offers good bang for your buck. Plant sciences are an emerging industry. It's becoming very clear to us that plant science and plant applications of plant technology are really key to healthcare. It's the original solution to good health. And so when I got involved in plant science, I realized very quickly how little that we know about plants. It's an entire field that is yet to be unexplored. It's a gold mine that hasn't been dug up. And so And that's how I really got the bug for it, because I realized that any research that I do will be related to fundamental discoveries in the entire field, and it's generally applicable across the board, versus in the medical industry or medical sciences, any little discoveries would be very specific to what you're studying. This is a generalization, of course. It's not true for every researcher, but in general, plant science is very nascent, it's growing, it's becoming bigger, and offers a lot of potential, and I find that way more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we do what we do, right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So when you did all your sort of study, did you do any work in between? Or any internships or anything?
Yeah, that's right. So when I finished my postgraduate diploma from the University of Auckland, I was looking for work. I got a technician role at Massey University in Palmerston North, so I went down to Palmerston North for that. I did that role working in a plant lab for about 2 years before I started my PhD. And yeah, in working in a plant lab, it's very interesting. Yeah, I got to work with all kinds of plants, looking at different aspects, aging, fruiting, things like that. And so there are many areas of plant science that I got to explore.
Awesome. So it's fair to say that you learned a lot from your time as a technician.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. In fact, I would say that in science in general, you're always learning. If you enter into the science field, be prepared to learn every day of the week. You're going to be learning something new. You're going to be trying something different. Often you'll be trying things in the dark without any sort of idea or what's going to happen. Or sometimes you have to develop the methods yourself. It's every day is exciting though. Every morning I wake up, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's always interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally feel the same way about science as you. Yeah. So you've studied and worked in several different countries. So in Australia and New Zealand, and then you spent a bit of time in Korea as well?
Yeah. So during my PhD, the first 2 years I did in New Zealand, and then my supervisor got a position in Korea. And so he practically shipped the whole lab across to Korea. So just over a year, I got to move to Korea with the whole lab and got to work in a different environment there. And yeah, I cannot state how radically different it is in Korea. Science is a different beast entirely in Korea. But yeah, it was an interesting experience, and the rapid pace of international science and basically science all across in different parts of the world, they have their own culture, and that's what I got to experience.
Sounds really interesting to be able to get to work in different environments like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Apart from the scientific environment, the whole social environment, experiencing a different country, trying the food, it was absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And if you ever get the opportunity, I totally recommend it. Go to a different country if you can, experience what the science is like there, and bring the good parts of it back home. And that's what I'm hoping to do here at Plant and Food.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the challenges of working in science and being a scientist? Because it can't all be good.
No, it definitely isn't. But having said that, there's overall a positive side to science. There are three things that I always talk about to most people that I meet. The first is that science is boring. Not science itself, but the scientific work, the day-to-day activities that you do, they can be quite tedious. They can be quite boring. And we don't really mention this too much to students, just to sort of stop them from, being afraid of entering science. But it can be quite disheartening when you enter a lab and then you suddenly realize you have to go through 1,000 plates of bacterial colonies and try and screen through them. And this can be quite tedious, but the science results itself, they're totally worth it. Because you're working towards a greater purpose, this can really motivate you more than most other jobs can. Secondly, communication in science can be quite stagnant. It's really hard to get people interested. It may seem that it's hard to get people interested in your science. And it can be quite difficult to communicate your work and its relevance to society. And so that's another thing that it can be quite difficult in science. And finally, the whole idea of pay is quite tricky. People tend to question scientists about, how much do you get paid? And in the science field, particularly considering the number of years that you go through school just to be able to investigate things that we investigate, it can be quite costly. And at the end of it, the remuneration, the pay that you get, isn't really nowhere near as much as doctors get or lawyers get. But science has its own reward. I would never, not even in a million years, swap my role for that of a higher paid job, because what I'm doing is important. What I do is fascinating, and that in itself is reward.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice would you give to people thinking about science as a career path? So whether it's tertiary students or high school students or anyone who's thinking about science as a career path?
It's a good question. I think the most important thing is to read broadly, to read widely, stay abreast of all the information that's coming out, and it can be quite tough. But most definitely keep your interest in science. Always think about why you're doing science and what it means to you. Keep that in mind, because it's important to the research that you're doing to keep motivated. And like I mentioned earlier, the activities can be quite boring. So when you're entering the field of science, don't expect it to be all explosions and flashbangs and things like that. It's going to be tedious day-to-day work. But you're gonna have ups, you're gonna have downs, and it's gonna be fascinating the whole way through. You're gonna learn a lot, and it's going to be very, very interesting. And secondly, get good at communicating. Talk to people. If you like social media, get good at communicating scientific information through that. Build up your skills. It's definitely going to help you, and it's going to help your industry in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jay, for taking time out of your day to come and share your career story so far with us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So if you guys have any questions or suggestions, you can email us at scigest@plantandfood.co.nz. And in our next interview, I'll be talking to fellow Scigester Blue Plunkett, a research associate in the Colour and Health team. Until then, thanks for listening.